Hi guys, in this tutorial we are going to talk about finding the right tone for communicating with your team. Now what do we mean by tone first of all? So tone reflects an individual's attitude, emotion and intent behind the words, and it shapes the overall message. So basically tone is how you say things. It's not what you say but how you say it. So it's not the message but the way the message is delivered. That's the tone of it. Now things like the way you say it in terms of intonation, in terms of volume, have an impact. The words that you choose to use have an impact. The grammar to an extent has an impact. So basically we're talking about finding the right measure of being in charge, clearly in charge, but also respectful and clear in your communications. The tone that you use affects how messages are interpreted, impacting clarity and the receiver's emotional response. If this is a little bit abstract, don't worry, I'll give you some examples in a second. Good tone can lead to fostering engagement, motivation, while a poor tone can cause misunderstanding and conflict. Again, we'll look at what we mean by good and poor in just a second. Poor tone can lead to demotivation, to reduce morale, breakdown in communication, all the things which cause problems in teams. And in this topic, key vocabulary that we would consider tone, delivery, perception, morale, communication climate, and communication dynamics. Okay, so like I said a moment ago, tone is not the message that you give, but how you give the message. So let's compare and contrast, for example. I need that report by 3 p.m. is neutral and direct. Could you please get that report to me by 3 p.m. is very polite. I expect that report by 3 p.m. can come a bit unnecessarily aggressive or dominating. It would generally be unnecessary, unless the report's already days late or something. So to be honest, it's not that one of these is better than the other. It's more about being context specific. So I think the first one is fine. I need the report by 3 p.m. It's very clear, it's very direct, and I think if you're working in international teams, maybe working with teams whose first language is not English, it's very unambiguous. Could you please get that report to me by 3 p.m? Now, if you're in the UK, for example, that's quite often how a manager would phrase that task. Could you please get that report to me by 3 p.m? And if we're talking about people who speak English as a first language, especially British English, where these sort of very polite structures are used a lot, then the meaning behind that phrase is clear. However, if English is not your first language, you might think because it's a question, it's actually a question, but it's not really a question. So if the manager says to you, could you please get that report to me by 3 p.m? You're not really allowed to say no. Right, so it's a question, but it's not really a question. But it's we often use that formulation to be polite. So it depends who you're talking to, depends what the circumstances are. Even the last one, I expect that report by 3 p.m. I think that's fine if the deadline has already been missed. For example, if it was supposed to be on my desk yesterday, or I was supposed to have it on my desk at 9 a.m. Come on, this report is hours late. I expect it by 3 p.m. In those circumstances, I think that's fair. In those circumstances, you probably wouldn't go for the very polite formulation. So it's based on context. Tone alters a message's meaning by adding emotion and attitude, impacting how the listener feels and reacts, even when the words remain the same or the message remains the same, let's say. Effective tone depends on word choice, intonation and context. Adjusting these elements helps convey respect, urgency or firmness as appropriate. And that's why it's really important for you guys, if you're doing this course, I imagine English is not your first language. So it's about knowing what the best way of communicating is given the prevailing circumstances, let's say. So your tone has to match your purpose. When you're given feedback, for example, you want to be supportive and respectful. Even if the feedback itself is not super positive, you want to make sure it's given in a respectful and supportive way where you can, because you want to help your employee improve. When you are assigning tasks, you want to be clear and confident to make sure that everyone knows you're in charge and they know what it is they're supposed to do and when it's supposed to be done by, crucially as well. When you're trying to motivate, you want to be energetic, you want to be positive to hopefully boost the morale. When you're addressing mistakes, you want to be calm and constructive. You always want to focus on the nature of the problem itself rather than the individual who might have caused that problem, right? Always focus on the situation rather than the individual, certainly at the beginning. You might also adapt your tone based on the type of team that you work with. So for example, creative teams will often respond best to collaborative and open tone, encourages ideas and innovation, fostering a supportive atmosphere. Where you want your team to be creative, you don't want to be negative when you think an idea is not the best, because people are going to be discouraged about taking risks or coming up with new ideas if you're very negative about it. And with technical teams, so really important to be concise, to be structured, clear, precise, so that the steps are easy to understand and easy to follow to allow task execution. Sales teams, we think about enthusiasm and motivation, a tone that energizes and drives performance, because so much of sales, so much of your sales team's success will be in the tone that they use with customers, prospective customers. Key vocabulary around this topic are adaptability, empathy, clarity, consistency, audience awareness. Who are you talking to and why? Always keep that in mind. It's important because the right tone improves understanding, first of all, boosts morale, and build stronger team relationships, ensuring the message resonates with each group. So it's really important to adapt your tone to the circumstances, to the team, to the type of team, and to the individual that you're interacting with. Common mistakes around tone. Overly formal tone can create distance and can make communication feel cold or impersonal, can alienate team members and hinder open communication. This can often happen when the manager or the leader is not speaking their first language because they're communicating in a competent way, but without maybe the nuance that would convey warmth or empathy or personal style. Too casual tone reduces perceived authority and may undermine the message's seriousness. Being too casual risks the message not being taken seriously or respected. A sarcastic or unclear tone causes confusion and misinterpretation of the intended message, especially in an international team. Sarcasm or unclear language often results in misunderstandings and reduced effectiveness. Mixed signals such as friendly words paired with a cold delivery lead to a loss of trust and credibility. Again, this is partly linguistic competence. Mixed signals confuse the audience, your colleague, damaging relationships and team morale. So again, repeating that point, keep in mind who you're talking to and why you're talking to them, and pitch your tone accordingly. So some phrases to think about, some precise vocabulary. Like I said, often in the UK, where I'm from, we would be very polite when giving instructions or commands effectively. So we say things like, I would appreciate it if you could. That'd be a very polite formulation. More neutral, but still pretty nice and polite. So can you please? Casual would be like, could you shoot that over to me? And again, it's going to depend on the message, who you're talking to, your relationship with that person, the type of team that you're working on, all these things, the prevailing corporate culture, regional culture, all these things will play a role in how you express yourself in these circumstances. Could and would are often used to soften messages. So rather than saying, can you give me, could you give me, they go together with hedging phrases, such as, I would appreciate it if you could. That's a hedging phrase. So we'll often use modal verbs, could, would, hedging, perhaps, maybe what we might call mitigating phrases or indirect questions, and wondering if, soften statements. But you have to make sure that the person you're giving the message to will understand the content of the message and the seriousness, the importance of the message, if you're using this sort of hedging language, this very polite language. A quick word on written communication as well. It's not something we're going to talk about too much in this course, but it is worth a brief thought about. So obviously, if you're writing rather than speaking, tone is managed in a different way. It's shaped by punctuation, by sentence structure, and by word choice, which it has in common with spoken English. And these things will have an effect on how the message is perceived. For example, writing in all caps, all capital letters, is often taken as shouting by email. This often is sort of seen as aggressive and unnecessarily aggressive. So be careful about writing in all caps. Often similar to spoken instructions, you're going to frame it in a polite way. Please complete by next week. Don't forget to. So these are commands. These are what we call imperatives grammatically, but they are made more polite by the presence of please. And again, a final word on spoken tone depends on stress, pace, volume. A calm voice builds confidence, and smiling, even on the phone, can brighten a vocal tone. People can hear it when you smile. People can hear the difference when you're smiling. But, again, that depends on the message and the context. Maybe you're not smiling. Maybe you're not happy. But you should try and remain calm and confident as well as a manager. So some final things to think about. Good managers adjust their tone based on the situation to ensure appropriateness and effectiveness. By situation, we mean the person, the type of team, the culture, the circumstance. Understanding the audience helps tailor the tone to resonate and engage effectively. Defining desired outcome guides the tone to achieve clear and purposeful communication. Key concepts include tone, empathy, clarity, register, and delivery. And something for you guys to think about: how can you adjust your tone to improve in your next team interaction? Whether you're a manager, whether you're not a manager, think about, what could I change, what could I develop and improve, especially if you're doing it in English, to communicate in tonally a better way. Thank you very much, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.